You don't belong here, Evelyn. You never did. Come home or face the consequences. She read Thomas Whitaker's letter 3 times, hands trembling, before she finally crumpled it into a ball and pressed it against her chest, so hard it almost stopped her breathing. If this story, about a woman who ran from everything she knew and found everything she never expected, speaks to you, please subscribe to our channel, hit the notification bell, and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. We want to know how far this story has traveled. The first thing Evelyn Harper did when she stepped off the train in Red Willow, Montana, was check over her shoulder. It was a habit she could no longer remember forming, like the way she kept her voice low even when no one told her to, or the way she always sat close to exits, or the way her hands went still whenever a man's footsteps came too close behind her. These were not choices she made consciously. They were things her body had decided to do on her behalf, long after her mind had grown too tired to argue. The platform smelled like coal smoke and hay, and something she could not immediately name, something wide and open and unheld. Like the sky itself had decided to closer to the ground out here. The mountains in the distance looked like they had been set there deliberately, like a wall between her and everything she was leaving behind. She shifted her suitcase from one hand to the other. It was not heavy. She had not brought much. A change of clothes, a Bible she rarely opened anymore, the photograph of her mother and father taken 3 years before the fever took them both, a small tin, not all at once, a peppermint candies she had bought at the station in Denver because she was nervous and she needed something to do with her hands, and they were the first thing she touched. She was 26 years old, and she felt considerably older. Miss Harper? The voice was quiet, not loud in the way men's voices usually felt loud to her, not pointed or sharp or loaded with something underneath it. Just a voice, asking a question. She turned. He was taller than she expected from the advertisement. The photograph he had sent with his letter had been small and slightly blurred, taken at some distance, and she had studied it so many times she had convinced herself she had memorized his face. But photographs did not carry the particular way a person stood. Caleb Whitmore stood the way she imagined. A fence post stood not rigid exactly, but settled, as if the ground beneath him had agreed long ago to hold him steady. He wore a weathered hat that had clearly seen real weather. His jacket was clean but not new. His boots were the boots of a man who wore them for work and not for appearances. He held his hat in both hands, turning it slowly by the brim, and she recognized that gesture immediately, because she had done it herself, with her own hands when she was nervous, and trying not to show it. "Yes," she said. "I'm Evelyn Harper, Caleb Whitmore." He nodded once, the way men out here seem to nod economically, without excess. "I appreciate you making the journey. Long way from Boston." "Yes," she said again, and hated herself for having so few words suddenly. He looked at her suitcase. "Is that everything?" "Yes." Something moved across his face. Not that pity. She knew what pity looked like, had been drowning in it for 2 years, and she already felt her spine straighten automatically against it. But it was not pity. It was something quieter, something that looked almost like understanding, which was stranger and harder to defend against. "All right," he said simply. "Wagons this way." He did not offer to take the suitcase. She appreciated that more than she could have explained. They walked in silence to the wagon, and he helped her up with one hand, brief, practical, released the instant she was settled, and then climbed up himself and clicked softly to the horse. And they moved out of Red Willow and into the land that opened up around them, like a held breath finally let go. For a long time neither of them spoke. This was, Evelyn realized, the most comfortable silence she had experienced in 2 years. Thomas Whitaker's house had never been quiet. Even the quiet there had been loud with what was not being said, thick with the particular tension of waiting for the next thing to go wrong. This silence felt different. This silence felt like it simply was. "I should tell you some things," she said finally, because silence eventually required something of her, and because she had been composing speeches in her head for the last 600 miles of train track, and none of them had survived contact with the actual moment. "About my situation. About why I answered your advertisement." "You don't have to tell me everything today," Caleb said, eyes on the road ahead. "Just know you're safe here. Evelyn opened her mouth, closed it, looked out at the mountains. She had been told a version of those words before. She had been told she was safe. She had been told there was nothing to worry about. She had been told she was cared for and protected and looked after, and every single time the words had been the net they used to catch her before they changed the terms. But something about the way Caleb said it, without looking at her, without requiring her to receive it in any particular way, without waiting for her gratitude, made it feel different from those other times. She did not believe him yet. She was not capable of believing anyone yet. But she tucked the words careful and kept her hands folded somewhere, her hands folded in her lap, and watched the landscape change. And thought that perhaps believing was something that could be attempted in small degrees. The ranch was modest. She had known it would be modest. The advertisement had said exactly what it was. A working cattle ranch outside town. No promises of grandeur. Looking for a capable woman, willing to build something alongside him. What the advertisement had not said, because perhaps he did not know how to say it, was that the house had a particular quality that she recognized from somewhere very far back in her memory, from before Thomas Whitaker, and before the funeral, and before everything changed. It felt like a place where someone actually lived, not like a house designed to impress visitors or demonstrate status, not like the cold-floored, high-ceilinged house Thomas had maintained because it suited his position. This was a house that showed its use. A worn path between the door and the well. A nail beside the entrance where a coat had hung so long it had shaped itself to the weight. A window in the kitchen facing east so that whoever cooked breakfast would have the morning light. Someone had thought about morning light. Evelyn stood in the doorway and looked at all of this and felt something she did not immediately recognize because she had not felt it in so long. She felt like she might be able to breathe here. "I made up the room at the end of the hall," Caleb said behind her. "It's yours. I'll stay in the main room until things are more settled." He said it matter-of-factly, with no particular weight, and she understood was telling her something important without making it a negotiation. "There's no expectation, Miss Harper. I wrote what I wrote in the advertisement and I meant it. This is an arrangement. We build it however makes sense." She turned to look at him. He was looking at the middle distance, still holding his hat, still turning it. She realized the hat was the thing he did when he was choosing words carefully, when he was trying to give her something without handing it to her in the wrong way. "Thank you," she said. "Kitchen's yours too," he added, as if he had just remembered something. "I don't expect a particular schedule. You'll find your own way. You're being very—" She stopped. Started again. "Most men who place those advertisements have specific requirements." Caleb glanced at her then. Not the long evaluation she was braced for, but a brief honest look, the kind of look that saw something without deciding what it meant yet. "I imagine they do," he said. "I have requirements too. They're just different ones, such as—" He considered this. "Honesty," he said finally. "Fairness. Willingness to do the work." A pause. "The rest of it tends to sort itself out if those are in place." Evelyn nodded slowly. She was watching him, the way she had learned to watch everyone for the contradiction between the words and the intention beneath them. She was very good at reading that space. 2 years under Thomas Whitaker's roof had turned that particular skill sharp and cold and reliable. She could not find a contradiction. She was not sure what to do with that. The first week was careful. They moved around each other, like people learning the geography of new rooms, noting where things were, how much space was needed, what required communication, and what could be managed alone. Caleb rose before dawn and came in after dark, and in between there was the ranch, which demanded everything he had, and apparently had always been that way. He left food on the table in the morning, and she cooked in the evening, and the first night, she set 2 plates at the table without thinking about it, and he sat down across from her, without commenting on it, as if this was simply what they did. She waited for the shift. The moment when the arrangement revealed its actual terms. It did not come. What came instead was Tuesday, when she was attempting to carry water from the well, and the bucket's handle broke, and she spilled water across the front of her dress. And her first instinct was to freeze, to calculate the damage, to prepare the apology that would forestall whatever came next. And what came next was Caleb coming around the corner of the barn, taking in the situation, and saying, "Handle's been going for a while. I'll fix it tonight, you all right?" "I'm fine," she said. "I'm sorry, for what?" She stopped for the water. He looked at the ground, then at her. "The handle broke," he said simply. "Happened to the bucket." And he went back around the corner of the barn. Evelyn stood there in her wet dress in the wide Montana morning and felt something in her chest shift. A small thing, barely noticeable, but real. It was the first time in 2 years that a mistake had not cost her anything. She did not know what to do with that either. So she went inside and changed her dress and started on the bread she had been planning to make, and found that her hands were steadier than usual. Caleb fixed the bucket handle that evening. He did not mention it. Neither did she. This was how it went. Small things accumulating. Small discoveries compounding into something she could not yet name, and did not trust herself to name, because naming things gave them weight. And weight could be taken away. He showed her the cattle records the second week, spreading the ledger across the kitchen table after supper, and explaining how he tracked the herd and what the numbers meant, and what he was trying to build toward. He explained it the way he explained everything, directly, without condescension, as if it was simply information that existed, and she was simply a person who could receive it. He pointed out a pattern she had not asked about, and then paused and said, "What do you think of that?" and looked at her expectantly and waited. She realized with a small shock that he actually wanted to know. "I think if you're losing more in the early spring than the late winter, the problem might be in how they're wintering, and not the weather itself," she said carefully, because she had been thinking about it while he talked, and the numbers had told her something. He looked at the ledger, looked at her. "That's exactly right," he said. "I've been trying to work that out for 2 seasons. Something warm moved through her that she immediately distrusted. She was not yet ready to trust warmth. But she noted it, the way she noted all the small data points of Caleb Whitmore, and stored it in the same careful place where she had stored his words about safety. It was 3 weeks before she let herself ride the mare. He had offered the first day. She had declined. He had not pushed it, had not asked why, had not brought it up again. And then one morning she had been standing at the fence, watching the mare move in the paddock, watching the particular freedom of the animal, the way it occupied its own body without apology or second-guessing, and something had reached up inside her chest and grabbed. "Could you show me?" she asked when he came up beside her. He did not say anything about how long it had taken, or why she had waited. He simply said sure and got the saddle. She was terrified. She had not been on a horse since she was 12 years old, and she had not been fully in her own body in far longer than that, and the combination of the height and the movement and the animal's warm aliveness beneath her made her grip the saddle with both hands and hold her breath. "You don't have to hold your breath," Caleb said, from beside her, hand light on the bridle. "She can feel it when you do. Makes her nervous." "I'm a little nervous too," Evelyn admitted, which was the most honest thing she had said to him yet. "That's all right," he said. "So was I the first time. You breathe anyway." She breathed. It helped. The mare seemed to exhale at the same moment. They walked the paddock like that for 20 minutes. And when she finally found the rhythm of it, when her body stopped fighting the horse and started moving with it, instead she felt something open in her that she was not expecting. Something that felt dangerously like joy. She did not quite let herself have it. But it was there. The days became weeks, and the weeks moved differently from any weeks she had known in 2 years, not dragging under the weight of dread, not speeding past in the numbness of survival, but moving at their actual speed, which felt like a revelation. Time, she discovered, felt different, when you were not spending it waiting for something bad to happen. But she was still waiting. She could not stop waiting. It was the deepest habit she had, deeper than the careful voice or the checked movements, deeper than the apologizing, this constant anticipation of the moment when the other shoe would come down. And so she watched Caleb Whitmore the way she watched everything, cataloging and cross-referencing, and looking for the seam in the performance where the real thing underneath would show through. What she found, instead of a seam, was a man who was also watching something. Not her, not in the way Thomas had watched her. Tracking and assessing and waiting to correct. This was different. Caleb watched things the way a careful person watched weather attentively, with genuine interest in the outcome, without the assumption that he could control it. She caught him once, standing at the edge of the paddock at dusk, completely still, watching the light change across the hills. She had come out to call him in for supper, and had stopped before she spoke because something in his stillness asked for it. Something in the way he stood made her not want to interrupt whatever conversation he was having with the evening. She waited. Eventually he turned and saw her, and something moved across his face, a brief unguarded thing there, and gone before he arranged his expression back to its usual quiet. "Sorry," he said. "Coming." "What were you looking at?" she asked. He paused, looked back at the hills. "Sister used to love that light," he said. Just that, and then he walked inside. She had not known he had a sister. He had said nothing about his family, had not pushed her for hers, had offered nothing of his own, and she had taken that to mean he was a private man, rather than a wounded one. But the way he said it, past tense, economical, the kind of brevity that covers something very large, told her something she had not expected. He was carrying something too. She thought about that for several days. She thought about it while she was working in the kitchen garden he had pointed out to her, and told her was hers, to do whatever she wanted with. She thought about it while she was teaching herself the cattle records, and while she was practicing on the mare, and while she was lying in the room at the end of the hall, listening to the Montana wind move around the house. He was carrying something too, and it had not made him cruel. This was the most confusing thing she had encountered so far, in her experience, which had been extensive in specific ways. The people who carried the most weight were the ones who pressed it down onto everyone around them. Thomas Whitaker carried great grievances, real ones, some of them financial and social and familial, and he had managed those grievances by distributing them outward as precisely and deliberately as a man laying irrigation channels. But Caleb seemed to carry his thing differently. Inward. Quietly. She did not know yet whether this was strength or suppression, but she was curious in a way she had not been curious about anything in longer than she wanted to admit. She decided that night that she would stay long enough to find out. This was not the same as deciding to trust him. It was not even the same as deciding to try. It was simply the smaller, more manageable decision to remain present for whatever the next chapter of information might be. Small decisions were what she had. She was working with what she had. The first real test came on a Thursday morning when she made a mistake in the cattle records, a transposition of numbers in the feed ledger that sent the accounting off by $12, and which she did not catch until Caleb was already looking at it, had already noticed the discrepancy, and looked up from the ledger to find her standing very still on the other side of the table, with her hands clasped and her breathing controlled, and her face arranged in the particular way she arranged her face when she was expecting consequence. He looked at the ledger. He looked at her. He looked back at the ledger. "I transposed the numbers," she said, because silence from her always felt like it was making things worse. "I can see that." He ran a finger across the row, easy enough to do. "I'll correct it." He picked up the pencil. She stood there, recalibrating. "You're not, it won't. You don't need me to." "It's $12 in the ledger," he said mildly, already correcting the entry. "Not $12 missing from the box." He looked up. "Why are your hands doing that?" She looked down. Her hands were clasped so tightly, her knuckles had gone white. She made herself release them. "Force of habit," she said. He set the pencil down. He looked at her with that direct, unhurried attention he brought to things he was taking seriously. "Evelyn," he said. It was only the second time he had used her first name. "I'm not going to punish you for a mistake in the ledger." "I know," she said. He waited. "I'm working on believing that," she added, and hated how much truth was in the admission. Something shifted in his expression. Not pity, still not pity, but something she could not quite identify. Something careful and a little raw. "All right," he said quietly. "Take the time you need." He went back to the ledger. She stood there another moment, then went out to the kitchen garden And when she got there, she sat down on the ground between the rows of new seedlings she had planted and put her face in her hands and breathed until her hands stopped shaking. Nobody had ever said take the time you need before. It was such a small thing to undo her. Summer moved into the ranch the way summer moves in Montana suddenly and completely. The cold spring one day and then the heat the next. Everything growing fast and loud. Evelyn moved with it. She moved differently now. Literally, her posture had changed. She had caught it in the reflection of the window one morning and barely recognized herself. Taller, less folded, more occupying of her actual dimensions. The mare was no longer work. The garden was producing. The cattle records were hers now as much as his. And Caleb had taken to asking her opinion on the numbers with a casualness that told her he had stopped performing the asking and started actually relying on the answers. She began to feel something that frightened her, more than almost anything she could remember, because it was not dramatic, and she had been trained to watch for the dramatic. The sudden shift, the turn, the reveal of what was really underneath. What she felt instead was something quiet and persistent and accumulating. She felt, with terrible gradual certainty, that she was beginning to want to stay. Not because she had nowhere else to go. Not because she could not survive on her own. She was beginning to believe, carefully, that she probably could. But because when Caleb came in from the cattle in the evenings with the particular exhaustion of a man who had spent himself entirely on something real, and sat across the table from her, and told her what he had found in the south pasture, or what Bill Hendricks, at the neighboring ranch, had said about the weather coming, and listened when she told him what she had been thinking about the records, and whether they should think about a second garden plot in those moments, she did not feel like a woman who had arrived somewhere with nothing. She felt like a woman who was building something. This was when the letter came. It arrived on a Wednesday, handed to Caleb at the post office in town when he went for supplies, and he brought it home without opening it, because it had her name on it, and he set it on the table and went out without mentioning it, which was its own statement about what kind of man he was. She knew the handwriting immediately. The thick, deliberate strokes of a man who had spent his life writing things he intended to be taken seriously. The address in Boston she had grown up calling home until it stopped being one. The seal pressed hard into the wax, as if force itself was part of the message. She did not open it right away. She stood and looked at it for a long time, and all the things she had built in the past months, the breathing, the sleeping in a room with a door she could choose to open or close, the hands that no longer clasped into fists. Without her permission, she felt all of those things tremble. She opened it. It was short. Thomas Whitaker's letters were always short when he was certain of his position. She read it 3 times. You don't belong there, Evelyn. You never did come home or face the consequences. She set it down on the table, very carefully, the way she had once learned to set glass things down in a house where the punishment for breaking things was specific and memorized. And then she sat down in the chair and she put her face in her hands. Because somewhere in the past 3 months, she had made the catastrophic mistake of starting to believe she had escaped him. And Thomas Whitaker had not received that particular memo. She was still sitting there when Caleb came back in an hour later. She heard his footsteps on the boards and did not move. He would see it. He would see the letter on the table, and he would see her, and he would have to choose whether to ask or not ask. And she discovered, sitting there with her hands over her face, that she did not know yet which one she needed him to do. His footsteps slowed, stopped. She heard him pick up the letter. There was a long silence, Evelyn. His voice was very quiet. She lifted her face from her hands. He was standing across the table, holding the letter, and he was looking at her with an expression she had not seen from him before, not anger, not judgment, not the particular calculation of a man deciding what this information meant for his own interests. He looked the way the evening light looked on those hills he had been watching. The day he mentioned his sister, clear and direct and carrying something he had not chosen and could not put down. He's going to say I belong to him, she said, because she needed to start somewhere. He was my guardian after my parents died. He had legal arrangement of care, and he used it as he used it to. She stopped, steadied, started again. I ran. I answered your advertisement, and I ran, and I never told him where I went because I knew he would do this. Caleb set the letter down slowly. He can't take you from here, he said. He doesn't need to physically take me, she said. He knows people. He has. There are legal arguments he can make about the arrangement, about our marriage, about whether I had the capacity to. She heard her own voice rising towards something she didn't want and pulled it back. He is very good at making things appear to be what they are not. Caleb was quiet for a moment. How long were you under his care? 4 years, another quiet. And in those 4 years, Caleb said very carefully, what did he do to you? The question was the kind that requires an honest answer, and Evelyn had been not answering it for so long that the words felt strange in her mouth, unfamiliar, like using muscles that had been carefully unused. She looked at the table. She looked at her hands, which were doing the clasping thing again, without her permission. He didn't hit me, she said. He knew better than that. He was too careful. He just made me very small, slowly. Specifically. The kind of small that's hard to explain, because there are no marks. She looked up. I think that might have been intentional. Caleb's jaw shifted slightly. That was the only visible sign of what this information was doing to him. He's not going to make you small here, he said. You can't promise that, she said. You don't know what he's capable of. No, Caleb agreed. I don't. But I know this. He sat down across from her, which he did not often do at this hour, which told her this was a deliberate thing. Whatever he tries, he is going to have to come through me. And I don't mean that in the way men say that when they want you to feel like property that's been transferred. He waited until she was looking at him. I mean that you're not going to face this alone, whatever it is. However it comes. She stared at him. She had received protection before. Thomas Whitaker himself had framed it as protection. I am protecting you, Evelyn. You don't understand the world. You need my guidance. You would be lost without this arrangement. And she knew exactly what protection that looked like when it was really just a different shape of the same cage. But Caleb was sitting across from her, and his face was entirely open, and he was not waiting for her gratitude or her relief or her capitulation. He was simply stating something that was true for him, the way he stated all the things that were true for him directly, without decoration, without requirement that she receive it in any particular way. She felt something shift in her chest that was bigger than any of the small shifts before. He'll come in person, she said. He won't just send letters. Then he'll come in person, Caleb said, and we'll deal with it. Outside, the Montana evening pressed against the window, and the first of the night birds had started somewhere out in the grass. She could hear the mare moving in the paddock, the same mare she had stood beside that first night, uncertain whether even to approach it, and now rode alone without thinking about it, her body having learned a language she had forgotten she knew. She thought about the woman who had stepped off that train 3 months ago, checking over her shoulder. She thought about the hands clasped in the kitchen garden, and the numbers transposed in the ledger, and the moment in the paddock when the mare exhaled, and something in Evelyn exhaled with it. She was not the same woman anymore. She was not finished becoming whoever she was going to be. But she was, she realized, for the first time in 4 years, genuinely frightened of losing something she wanted to keep. And that was its own kind of proof that something had changed. Thomas Whitaker was coming. He always came when he felt entitled to something. And Evelyn Harper, for the first time in 4 years, looked at the man across the table and thought, this time, I am not going to run. She did not sleep that night. She lay in the room at the end of the hall and listened to the house breathe around her. The particular creaks and settlements of a structure that had weathered many Montana winters, the way the wind moved along the eaves, the distant sound of the mare shifting in the paddock, and she thought about Thomas Whitaker's handwriting and the specific weight of the words he chose, and how even from 600 miles away he had managed to reach into this house and make the air feel different. That was his particular genius. He had never needed to be in the room to fill it. She had left Boston in March with $17, A train ticket she had saved for over 8 months by hiding coins in the hollow bottom of a sewing box. He had never thought to search, and the answer to an advertisement she had read in a newspaper. Someone left on a bench she was occasionally permitted to visit. She had told no one. She had packed in the hours between 3 and 5 in the morning, when the house was its most vacant, when Thomas was at his deepest sleep and his housekeeper was not yet arrived. And she had walked to the station in the dark and bought her ticket and sat in the last car and watched Boston dissolve behind her and felt something she was almost afraid to call relief. She had been so careful. She had been so certain she had left no trail. But Thomas Whitaker had resources she did not have, and patience that she had always underestimated, and a fundamental conviction that things belonging to him had a way of returning, because that was simply the natural order of things, as he understood it. She had been naive to think a train ticket was enough. She got up before dawn and went to the kitchen and put water on for coffee because she needed something to do with her hands that was not wringing them. She had been in the kitchen perhaps 10 minutes when she heard Caleb's door and his footsteps in the hall earlier than his usual hour, and she understood that he had not slept either. He came in and looked at her standing at the stove, and did not say anything for a moment. "Coffee's not ready yet," she said. "That's fine." He sat down at the table. He had not bothered with his hat, and without it he looked slightly different, not smaller, exactly, but more interior, more the man who existed when the working day had not yet assembled itself around him. "Did you sleep?" "No, me neither." He folded his hands on the table. "I've been thinking, so have I," she said. "You first." She turned from the stove. "He's going to claim the marriage isn't valid, or that I wasn't in a condition to enter into it freely. He has 2 lawyers in Boston who have spent 10 years making things appear however he needs them to appear. And he has friends in territorial government who owe him various favors, and he is extraordinarily motivated." She heard how flat her voice was and could not make it otherwise. "I've watched him dismantle people. He's patient and he's methodical, and he does not stop." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "You think he actually wants you back? Or is this about something else?" She looked at him. "What do you mean?" "A man who can afford 2 lawyers and territorial connections," Caleb said carefully, "doesn't show woman 600 miles because he misses her company. What does he actually get if you come back?" She had not expected that. She stood with the question for a moment, because it was the right question, and she had spent 4 years inside the situation, without the distance to see its actual shape. "My father's estate," she said slowly. "It was held in trust until I married or turned 30. The trust was administered by Thomas because he was named guardian. If our marriage is declared invalid, or if I'm declared incompetent to have entered it, then the trust administration returns to him until I'm 30. How much is the estate? I don't know exactly. My father never discussed money in front of me. But Thomas was very interested in managing the trust, and Thomas is only interested in things that are worth his interest." Caleb nodded slowly. "All right," he said, "so this isn't about you." "It was never about me," she said, and she meant it as a statement of simple fact, and was surprised when her voice went raw at the end of it. He looked at her steadily. "It's about what he thinks he owns." "Yes, he doesn't own you. I know that." She turned back to the coffee. "The court may not agree. Then we make sure the court doesn't have to decide." He said it with the same quiet certainty he brought to problems with the cattle, the kind of certainty that came not from arrogance, but from having solved difficult things before, and knowing that the path through most problems, however complicated they looked, was a series of manageable steps taken in the right order. What would he need to make his legal case? Witnesses who say I was unstable. A challenge to the circumstances of our marriage. Time mostly. He would need to drag it out long enough that fighting it becomes more expensive than giving up. And do you want to fight it? The question landed on her like something solid. She set the cups on the table and sat down across from him and thought about it honestly, the way she had been practicing thinking about things without the automatic flinching away from her own desires, without the reflex of substituting what was safe for what was wanted. "Yes," she said, "I want to fight it." Something moved through Caleb's expression that she was beginning to learn the name of, though she was careful about that learning, careful not to trust her own reading too quickly. It looked like satisfaction. Not the smug satisfaction of a man who has gotten what he wanted, but the quieter kind, the satisfaction of something being confirmed. "Then that's what we do," he said. The coffee was ready, and she poured it, and they sat across from each other in the early morning, while the light began to change outside the window, and talked through it, the way two people talk through a practical problem, which she realized was itself a remarkable thing, that she had a person to talk through it with, that her voice in the conversation had equal weight, that no one was telling her what she thought, or managing what she was permitted to be afraid of. It was remarkable, and she did not yet entirely trust that it was real, but she was choosing, carefully and deliberately, to proceed as if it were. The town of Red Willow had its own relationship with trouble. It was a frontier town in all the ways that phrase implied. Accustomed to hard weather and harder circumstances, populated by people who had mostly come from somewhere else to be somewhere different, held together by the practical necessities of community more than any shared history. The people who survived here were the ones who had learned that you handled your problems as directly as possible, because indirect handling was a luxury that frontier life did not generally offer. Caleb was known in Red Willow in the particular way that honest, quiet men are known, not famous, not prominent, but trusted, which out here was considerably more valuable. People knew he paid what he owed, and said what he meant, and kept what he promised. They knew he was the man you went to when you needed something done right and done without drama. And they had been watching, with the carefully averted curiosity of a small community, the woman who had arrived on the spring train and moved into his ranch house, and started turning the kitchen garden into something remarkable. They did not know her yet, but they were willing to. Evelyn had not permitted herself to engage much with the town. She had been in survival mode, focused entirely on the immediate project of not falling apart, and social engagement had felt like too much exposure. But Caleb had been quietly, without fanfare, introducing her into the fabric of the community in the way that he did most things, gradually, practically, without requiring her to perform anything. He had taken her to the general store and introduced her to the Andersons, who ran it and who were the primary information exchange of Red Willow, with the economy of a man who understood that information shared became protection. He had brought her to the small church for the community meetings they used, in lieu of a formal municipal structure, and had sat beside her without making any show of it, and had answered questions about ranch business while she listened and began, slowly, to hear the individual voices in the chorus of the community. She had started tentatively to speak to some of those voices. Martha Hendricks, wife of the neighboring rancher Bill, was the first woman Evelyn had spoken to at any real length since Boston. Martha was 50 years old and had come west herself 20 years ago from Ohio, and had that particular practicality of women who have survived a great deal without stopping to calculate whether they deserved to. She brought a pie to the ranch one afternoon in early August, blueberry, made with berries she had apparently picked herself from somewhere she declined to specify, and set it on Evelyn's kitchen table, and sat down without being asked and said, "You look like you're deciding whether to trust people." Evelyn looked at her. "Is it that visible?" "Only to women who've done it themselves," Martha said. "The ones who haven't don't notice." They talked for 2 hours. Martha did not ask questions about where Evelyn had come from, or what she had left behind, or why she had answered a marriage advertisement from a man she'd never met. She talked about her own first year in Montana, the cold and the work, and the particular loneliness of being somewhere your entire past had no purchase. She talked about Bill Hendricks, who had been a difficult man in his early years, and had become a good one, and the long, slow process of learning the difference between a man who was difficult because he was damaged, and a man who was difficult because he had decided that was what he wanted to be. "Your Caleb," Martha said, "is the first kind." "He's not mine," Evelyn said automatically. Martha looked at her with the particular expression of a woman who has lived long enough not to argue with small evasions. "Right," she said. More pie? It was Martha who told her about Caleb's sister. Not deliberately, it came up sideways, in the middle of a conversation about something else, the way important things often found their way into conversations in Martha's kitchen. Her name had been Clara. She had been 23 years old when she married a man from the next county, who had seemed, by all external indicators, to be a reasonable choice. He had not seemed unreasonable until they were 2 months into the marriage, and 6 months in it had become undeniable. And by the time anyone fully understood what was happening, Clara had been trying to manage it alone for over a year, because she was ashamed, and because she thought she was somehow responsible for having chosen wrong. Caleb had found out late. Too late, Martha said. In the particular way people said things when they meant that the worst had already happened. Clara was alive. Martha was careful about that. Clara was alive and living now with a cousin in Oregon, and was, by all accounts, doing better. But Caleb had arrived at his brother-in-law's door exactly 24 hours too late to prevent the worst of it. And he had carried that 24 hours in the same pocket where he kept his guilt, and as far as Martha knew, he had never set either of them down. That's why he is the way he is, Martha said, with you. Careful like that. Evelyn thought about the bucket handle, about take the time you need, about the ledger and the quiet mornings, and the hand extended on the platform that was released the instant she was steady. He's not careful because he pities me, she said slowly, working it out as she said it. No, Martha agreed. He's careful because he knows exactly what it costs when someone isn't. This changed things, not dramatically. Nothing with Caleb ever changed dramatically. Everything with him was incremental and earned and real in the specific way that slow things were real. But it changed the quality of what she saw when she looked at him. The way knowing the note changes the way you hear the music. He was not performing gentleness. He had arrived at it through grief. She thought about that for a very long time. It was in the last week of August that she made a decision that surprised her. Because it was not a defensive decision, and it was not a survival decision, and it was not even a particularly logical decision. It was simply the thing that her honest self wanted, and she had been practicing listening to that self. And she listened. She asked Caleb to teach her to shoot. He looked at her over the breakfast table with a careful attention that told her he was taking the request seriously and not drawing conclusions about it. Can you tell me why? Because I'm tired of being someone things happen to, she said. I want to be someone who can respond. He looked at her for another moment. Then he nodded once. After the morning work, he said. He was a good teacher. Patient, the way he was patient with everything. Not patient in the performing way. Not patient in the way that communicated endurance of someone else's inadequacy, but patient in the way of a person who genuinely understood that learning took time and found that fact interesting rather than irritating. He showed her how to stand and how to hold and how to breathe, and he corrected her without apology and without praise, just matter-of-factly. Here, like this, try again. She was terrible the first day. She was less terrible the second. By the end of the first week, she could hit the fence post 9 times out of 10. You have good instincts, Caleb said. I have good reasons, she said. He did not smile. Caleb smiled rarely. And she had learned to find the economy of it valuable, like something that meant more because it was not spent carelessly, but his expression shifted in a way she had come to recognize. Approval, she thought, the real kind. The kind that did not require her to do anything with it. They were walking back toward the house after the 3rd day of practice when he said, without preamble and without the usual lead-up of gathering himself that preceded the things he said that mattered, Clara would have liked you. She stopped walking. He kept going for a step, then stopped too, as if he had not entirely meant to say it aloud, and was now determining what to do with the fact that he had. Tell me about her, Evelyn said. He was quiet for a moment. The long Montana quiet that she had learned to read, this one was not avoidance. This one was someone choosing which words to trust with something that mattered. She was stubborn, he said finally, in the way that looked like difficulty until you understood that she was just completely herself. Didn't apologize for it. I used to think that was going to be a problem for her. He stopped. Turned out it was the thing that saved her in the end. She was too completely herself to be entirely destroyed. Evelyn thought about what it meant to be completely yourself. She thought about the woman she had been 4 years ago, and the woman she had been when she stepped off the train, and the woman she was now, standing in a Montana field with gunpowder still faint on her hands, and she thought about the distance between those women, and what had been lost in the crossing, and what was, slowly and improbably being recovered. "I think I used to be stubborn like that," she said. "I think you still are," Caleb said. "It's just been underground for a while." They started walking again. That night at supper, he told her more the pieces that came loose when a person begins trusting someone with their careful things. Clara, at 15, arguing down their father about whether she was allowed to go to the county fair. Clara teaching herself to read French from a book she had found at the church sale and then using it to correspond with a woman in New Orleans who had placed an advertisement for a pen friend. Clara at the wedding, which Caleb had attended with misgivings he had told himself were unfounded, standing up straight with her chin at a particular angle that should have told him everything. He talked, and Evelyn listened. And somewhere in the middle of it she realized that he was not giving her information. He was giving her something else. He was giving her Clara, the real one, the full, the one he kept, because there was nowhere else to keep her. "You've never told anyone else this much, have you?" she said. It was not a question. He was quiet for a moment. "No." "Why me?" Another quiet, longer, the kind where she could see him working with something honestly, not giving her the easy answer. "Because you know what it actually costs," he said finally. "I don't have to translate it." She looked at him, across the table, in the lamplight, in the house that had started as a strange and careful arrangement, and had become something she could not yet name, but increasingly could not imagine being without. And she understood something she had been approaching from a long distance for several weeks. She was falling in love with Caleb Whitmore, not in the way the novels described it, which she had always suspected were describing a different animal entirely, not with the certainty and the drama and the sudden recognition of destiny, with something quieter and more terrifying, the slow accumulation of evidence that this particular person, in this particular way, had become necessary to her in a manner that was not about need, but about want. And the distinction between those two things was, she now understood, everything. She was not going to tell him, not yet, maybe not for a long time. There were too many things still unresolved, and she did not trust her own timing, and she was not yet certain she trusted his. Not his intentions, which she had stopped questioning, but his feelings, which he kept as carefully as everything else, he kept carefully. But she knew, and knowing changed the stakes of everything. Thomas Whitaker was moving toward. The second letter arrived, 12 days after the first. She opened this one herself, standing at the kitchen table, not waiting for her hands to stop before she read it. She did not want to manage herself into courage anymore. She wanted courage to be the unmanaged thing, the first thing, the thing underneath. Thomas had engaged a lawyer in Helena, the territorial capital. The lawyer had been tasked with examining the legality of her marriage to Caleb Whitmore under the circumstances of her departure from Boston and her status as ward under an existing guardianship arrangement. The lawyer would be in Red Willow within the month. She put the letter down and went to find Caleb. He was in the barn, doing something complicated with a piece of tack that had broken, and he looked up when she came in and read her face before she had said a word, because he had gotten very good at reading her face. Or perhaps he had always been good at it, and she had only recently stopped trying to make it unreadable. "Another letter," he said. "He sent a lawyer." She handed it to him. He read it. His jaw did the thing it did when he was holding something in, the small shift she had learned to notice. "Helena," he said. "He has connections there. He would." "So do I." He handed the letter back to her. "Bill Hendricks's brother-in-law is a practicing attorney in Helena. Good one. We'll write to him today." She stopped. Looked at him. "Why are you doing this?" He frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" This was meant to be a practical arrangement, a marriage of convenience. You didn't sign on for legal battles with a Boston guardian with territorial connections. You could. This is not your problem. He looked at her for a long moment. She had the particular feeling she sometimes got with him of being seen very precisely. Of having I said something that he was receiving exactly as she meant it and responding to exactly what she meant, rather than some managed version of it. Evelyn, he said. You're my wife, in arrangement, she said. In name. In the eyes of the law, which is what matters to the lawyer coming from Helena. He set the piece of tack down. And in this house, which is what matters to me, she looked at him. This is my problem, he said, simply. Because you're here, and you're staying, and whatever tries to take you away from here is something I intend to deal with. That's not complicated. You make it sound not complicated. Most things aren't, he said. People make them complicated because they're afraid to want them simply. She stood in the barn holding the letter and looking at this man who had told her on the first day that she did not have to tell him everything, who had given her time and space, and the quiet education of being treated as capable, who had shared his sister with her, across a supper table in the lamplight, who was now telling her in the plainest possible language that she was his to protect. Not because she was property, but because she was his, in the specific way that people who choose each other become each other's. I'm afraid, she said, not of Thomas, or not only of Thomas. Of this, of wanting it. I know, Caleb said. That's all right. What if he wins? Then we figure out what comes after that. He picked up the tack again. But I don't intend to let him. She nodded. She turned to go. Evelyn. She stopped. I'm glad you stayed. His voice was quiet, and he was looking at the tack and not at her, which she had learned was how he said the things he meant most. She stood with that for a moment, the way she had learned to stand with the things he gave her receiving them. Without deflecting, without minimizing, without the reflex of making herself smaller than what was being offered. So am I, she said. She went back to the house and sat down at the kitchen table and wrote the most honest letter of her life. She addressed it to herself, to the woman who had packed a suitcase in the dark in Boston and walked to a train station and trusted a stranger's advertisement more than she trusted the man who was supposed to care for her. She told that woman what she had found. She told her what it felt like to make a mistake and have it cost nothing, to learn to ride and to shoot and to want things simply and to sit across a table from a man who was listening. She wrote 3 pages, and then she folded them and put them in the hollow bottom of her sewing box, next to the tin of peppermint candy she had never opened and the photograph of her parents, and she closed the lid. Thomas Whitaker's lawyer was coming. Let him come. Because Evelyn Harper, Evelyn Whitmore now, in the eyes of the law and increasingly in her own, had not survived 4 years of Thomas Whitaker by being the woman he thought she was. She had survived by being far stronger than he had ever bothered to discover, and she was done being quiet about it. The lawyer's name was Gerald Pratt, and he arrived on the first Tuesday of September in a suit that had not been made for Montana and boots that had clearly never seen unpaved ground. He came alone, which Evelyn had not expected. She had imagined Thomas would send someone with more visible authority, someone whose physical presence announced the weight behind the legal argument. But Gerald Pratt was slight and pale, and carried a leather satchel with the careful attention of a man who understood that his power lived inside it, not on his person. He sent a note to the ranch the morning after his arrival at the Red Willow Hotel, requesting a meeting at his earliest convenience. The note was polite. The politeness was the most threatening thing about it. Caleb read it at breakfast and set it beside his coffee cup and said, "Have you heard from Henderson yet?" Henderson was the attorney in Helena Bill Hendricks's brother-in-law, James Henderson, who had responded to their letter within the week with a thoroughness that told Evelyn he understood exactly what kind of case this was. He had asked precise questions and given precise answers, and told them what ground they were standing on and what ground was uncertain. And the map he had drawn of their legal situation was neither as good nor as bad as she had feared. His second letter came yesterday, she said. I didn't want to bring it up until I'd read it through properly. Caleb looked at her, and he says the guardianship arrangement was always provisional. It was established because I had no other family and no independent means, and it was designed to terminate upon marriage. Thomas's argument would be That the marriage itself is flawed, that I lacked the legal standing or the mental capacity to enter into it without his consent. Do you need a guardian's consent to marry in Montana? No. But he'll argue the question isn't Montana law, it's whether I was still a legal ward under the Massachusetts arrangement at the time of the marriage. Henderson says the argument has surface merit but falls apart under scrutiny, because a valid territorial marriage supersedes a provisional guardianship from another jurisdiction. She paused. He also says Thomas knows this, which means the legal challenge isn't really about winning. It's about making the process long enough and expensive enough that we settle. Settle meaning you go back. Settle meaning I go back. Caleb was quiet for a moment, and she watched him do what she had watched him do with every hard piece of information she had brought him over the past months. Receive it without flinching. Turn it over. Locate the practical edge of it. What does Henderson need from us? Documentation of the marriage. Witnesses to our domestic situation, and if possible, she stopped. What? He says if we have any evidence of how Thomas administered the trust, any record of irregularity or misuse, that changes the nature of the case entirely. It moves it from a guardianship dispute to a financial fraud question, which is a different kind of court and a different kind of exposure for Thomas. Caleb set down his coffee. He's been stealing from your father's estate. I don't know that. I've never had access to the trust accounts. Thomas managed everything. She looked at the table. But I know that when I arrived in Boston 4 years ago, there was a house and a household staff and a level of functioning that I understood to be appropriate. The estate my father left. And when I left, there was one housekeeper and 2 rooms that had been closed off, and Thomas had sold the horses. She looked up, and Thomas's personal circumstances had improved considerably in those same 4 years. The silence between them had weight. He's been taking from it, Caleb said. I believe so, but belief and evidence are different things. Henderson can subpoena the trust accounts, only if we can establish grounds, which requires making the case first. She folded her hands on the table. We're going in circles, Caleb. The answer to every problem is the problem itself. He was quiet for another moment. Then he said, what if we don't wait for him to make his case? She looked at him. What do you mean? Pratt sent a note requesting a meeting. We could request one first, on our terms in our space with Henderson's instructions in hand. He met her eyes. He's expecting us to be reactive. He's built his whole approach on the assumption that you'll be frightened, and I'll be outmaneuvered. What if we're neither? The thing about Caleb Whitmore, Evelyn had come to understand, was that he was not reckless. He was the opposite of reckless. He thought through the ground before he stepped onto it, which meant that when he said something, with that particular quiet certainty, it was not bravado, and it was not wishful thinking. It was a man who had already calculated the path, and was now telling her where he intended to walk. You want to meet with Pratt before he's ready. I want to meet with Pratt while we still control the conversation, Caleb said. The minute he starts formal proceedings, the conversation moves to Henderson's terrain, and that's where it belongs. But right now, this minute, he's sitting in a hotel room in a town he doesn't know, representing a man whose position is weaker than he thinks, and he hasn't yet decided exactly how to play it. He paused. I'd like to meet him before he decides. She looked at him. You've done this before. Done what? Walked into a situation deliberately. Decided the terms before someone else could. Something moved across his face. Cattle negotiations, he said. Men who come in, expecting you to be grateful, they're considering your herd price it lower than it's worth. If you let them set the opening, you are always arguing upward from their number. Better to have your number on the table first. It was such a practical metaphor for something that felt enormous that she almost laughed. All right, she said. We meet with Pratt. She sent the note herself. She wrote it in the clear, level handwriting she had learned from her mother, and which Thomas had always said was the only elegant thing about her. She requested a meeting that afternoon at the Red Willow Hotel at 2 o'clock at their convenience. She signed it Mrs. Evelyn Whitmore. She had not signed anything that way before. The name sat on the page and looked back at her. She folded it and gave it to young Danny Marsh, who ran messages in Red Willow for a penny apiece, and went to change her dress. She chose deliberately. Not her best dress. Wearing her best dress would have communicated performance. And she was not performing anything today. She chose the dress she wore when she managed the cattle records and met with Caleb about the ranch business. Dark blue wool, practical and clean, the dress she wore when she was working. Because this was work. Caleb came in from the barn and looked at her, and looked at the note she had already sent, and nodded once. Ready, he said. No, she said. Let's go. Gerald Pratt was, in person, exactly what his note had promised: careful, polite, and completely committed to the position that he was the most reasonable man in the room. He stood when they came in and shook hands with the slightly excessive courtesy of a man who has been told to manage an adversarial situation through the appearance of goodwill, and he gestured to the chairs across from him with the practiced hospitality of someone who had done many meetings in many hotel rooms and had learned that controlling the furniture helped control everything else. Evelyn sat, Caleb sat. Neither of them looked around the room or at each other. Mrs. Whitmore, Pratt began. I appreciate your willingness to meet. My client, Mr. Whitaker, has asked me to convey his sincere concern for your well-being and his hope that this matter can be resolved with minimal difficulty for all parties. Mr. Pratt, Evelyn said before he could continue. We received your note this morning. We have also received a letter from our attorney, Mr. James Henderson of Helena, regarding the legal basis of Mr. Whitaker's inquiry. She watched Pratt's eyes change the smallest adjustment. The recalibration of a man who had just learned the terrain was different from what he expected. We wanted to meet with you directly before formal proceedings began, because we believe in efficiency. Of course, Pratt said. He had paused before saying it. Mr. Whitaker's guardianship arrangement, she continued, was established under Massachusetts law, and was explicitly provisional, contingent upon my remaining unmarried and without independent means. I am now married, under valid territorial law, with witnesses, properly recorded in Red Willow County. Mr. Henderson's position is that the guardianship terminated upon my marriage and that any challenge to the validity of that marriage would need to establish grounds under Montana territorial law, not Massachusetts civil code. She paused. Are those the grounds Mr. Whitaker intends to pursue? Pratt looked at her with an expression that had mixed from the managed friendliness he had brought to the beginning of this meeting. He was reassessing. She could see him doing it, Mrs. Whitmore. I understand you may have concerns. Please answer the question, she said. There was a silence. Caleb beside her said nothing. He was perfectly still in the way. He was perfectly still when he was paying absolute attention, and his stillness was its own kind of pressure in the room. My client's position, Pratt said, more carefully now, is that the circumstances under which you entered this marriage may not reflect the freely made decision of a woman in full possession of. Of what? Evelyn asked. Pratt paused. Of complete information and unencumbered will. I had complete information, she said. I had Mr. Whitmore's advertisement, which was entirely accurate. I had his correspondence, which was exactly what he represented it to be. I had the testimony of my own judgment, which I exercised without coercion in choosing to respond. She looked at Pratt with the steadiness she had been practicing for months, the steadiness she had built from nothing. From the first time she refused to look at the floor when a man in authority expected it. If Mr. Whitaker's position is that a woman's judgment cannot be trusted when it leads her away from his house, that is a position he is welcome to make to a court. We will welcome the examination. Pratt set his pen down. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Caleb, which was a mistake, because Caleb was looking back at him with the expression of a man who has already done all the deciding he intends to do and is simply waiting for the conversation to catch up. Mrs. Whitmore, Pratt said finally, I think there may be a way to resolve this without court involvement that would serve everyone's interests more. What Mr. Whitaker wants, she said, is access to my father's trust. That is what this is about. Not my welfare, not any legal principle. The trust. She watched Pratt's face go through several things in quick succession. Our attorney has advised us that a subpoena for trust administration records would be within our rights as part of any legal challenge to the marriage. We have not yet decided whether to pursue that avenue. But I want you to understand that we know what avenue it is. She stood. Please convey our position to Mr. Whitaker. We are happy to continue this conversation with our attorneys present. She walked out. Caleb followed her, and she heard him say, very quietly, to Pratt before he left, "You should know, she's not the woman you were expecting." Outside, the afternoon air was cooler than the hotel room, and she stood in it for a moment, and breathed it in deliberately, the way she breathed in things she was trying to hold on to. Her hands were shaking. She had not let them shake in the room. They had been still in the room, pressed flat against her thighs when she was not using them. Completely still and completely controlled. But here, outside, they shook, and she let them. Because out here it was safe to be the person who was terrified under the person who had refused to show it. Caleb came up beside her. He did not say anything. He stood close enough that she could feel the solid certainty of his presence, the particular gravity of a man who was not going anywhere, and after a moment he said, "How did you know about the trust?" "I've always known," she said. "I just never let myself think about it directly. It was safer not to know things Thomas didn't know I knew." "You've been surviving like that for 4 years." "Yes." He was quiet. She was looking at the street, at Red Willow going about its afternoon business, at the ordinary life of a town that had not the slightest awareness of what had just happened in a hotel room in its center. "You were extraordinary in there," Caleb said. "I was terrified." "I know." A pause. "That's what makes it extraordinary." She turned to look at him. He was watching the street the way he watched the hills at evening, with that clear attention that did not require its object to do anything. She thought about what Martha had said, the first kind, the kind that becomes good. "He's not going to give up," she said. "Pratt will send Thomas a full report, and Thomas will. He doesn't give up when he believes he's owed something. We've started something today that doesn't end with a hotel room conversation." "No," Caleb agreed. "It doesn't. Are you ready for that?" He looked at her then. Directly, the way he looked at things he was telling the truth about. "Are you?" She thought about the woman on the train, the coins in the sewing box, the letter written in the dark before 5 in the morning, and the long ride through changing landscapes toward a name, an advertisement, and the terrifying leap of deciding that something unknown was better than something known and unbearable. She thought about bucket handles, and cattle records, and the mare in the paddock, and 3 pages folded in the bottom of a sewing box. "Yes," she said. The letter from Thomas arrived 4 days later, and it was not addressed to her. It was addressed to Caleb. She was not certain, at first, whether she was meant to see it. Caleb brought it in from the post office without commenting on it, set it on the table, and went to wash up for supper, which could have meant he had read it already, or could have meant he was deciding how to handle its existence. She stood looking at it for a moment. Thomas's handwriting on the envelope, Caleb Whitmore, Red Willow, Montana Territory, and then she picked it up. "Is it all right if I read this?" she called. "It's on the table," Caleb said from the other room, which was answer enough. She read it standing up. Thomas had not used his lawyer this time. This was Thomas himself, in the voice she knew from 4 years of documents and household directives, and the particular communications he reserved for situations where he felt his authority had been directly challenged. The voice was controlled, and it was cold, and it was threaded through with the very specific contempt he held for people who had underestimated their position. He addressed Caleb as a man who had been deceived. He said Evelyn was not what she appeared. He said she had a history of instability. He used the word history, as if there were documents, as if this were established and recorded, and that her behavior in leaving Boston had been exactly the type of irrational flight that characterized her condition. He said Caleb was a reasonable man, he was certain, who would not want to be responsible for the consequences of harboring a woman in a state of diminished judgment. He offered, generously and without prejudice, to return Evelyn to proper care, and he suggested that a man of Caleb's practical intelligence would recognize that the simpler course was the better one. He ended by noting that he had connections at the territorial level that made prolonged disputes uncomfortable for all parties, and that he sincerely hoped they could avoid that particular discomfort. It was the most elegant threat she had ever read. She set the letter down. Caleb came back into the kitchen, dried his hands, looked at her face, and looked at the letter. He picked it up. He read it. She watched him, read it, watched the jaw shift, watched his hands tighten slightly on the paper, watched the very deliberate way he set it down when he was finished. "He called you unstable," Caleb said. His voice was quiet. The particular quiet that was not the absence of feeling, but its very precise containment. "Yes, the history of instability he mentions does not exist. I have never been unstable, I have been frightened," which he interpreted as instability when it suited him and managed when it did not. She met Caleb's eyes. "That's the strategy. If he can establish in the record that I am a woman of diminished judgment, then everything I've done since leaving Boston, including this marriage, becomes evidence of the diminished judgment. It's circular. He designed it to be circular. He wrote to me specifically to try to separate us," Caleb said. "Yes. He thinks you're the weak point. He thinks if he can convince you that I'm a problem, his word, or close to it, you'll step back, and then I have no." She stopped. "No what? No ground to stand on," she said quietly. He looked at her for a long time. And then he did something she had not seen him do before. He picked the letter back up and he tore it. Not with anger, not the tearing of a man who has lost his temper, but deliberately, methodically, the way he did everything deliberate and methodical. He tore it into quarters and then into eighths, and then he crossed to the stove and dropped the pieces into the firebox. "He thinks I don't know you," Caleb said, back still turned. She stared at him. He turned around. "He wrote that letter to a man who met you 3 months ago and has been living with an arrangement. He doesn't understand that in 3 months I have learned exactly who you are." He paused. "And what I know is the opposite of what he's claiming." Her throat had closed. She was aware of it and could not immediately address it. "Evelyn." He said her name the way he said it, when what followed was going to be the thing he actually meant. "You are the most clear-minded person I have encountered in a very long time. What you did in that hotel room, the way you prepared, the way you read him, the way you walked out, that is not a woman of diminished judgment. That is a woman who survived 4 years of someone trying to diminish her judgment and came out the other side with it completely intact." She was not going to cry. She had decided a long time ago, somewhere in Thomas Whitaker's house, that she was not going to give him the satisfaction of the tears, and she had kept that promise to herself across so much geography and so many circumstances that it had become something solid inside her. She did not cry, but she felt the whole architecture of the past 4 years shake at its foundations, because someone who was not her had said the true thing, the thing she had known about herself and been unable to defend, because she had no witness. She had a witness now. "Write to Henderson tonight," she said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of how steady it was. "Tell him about the letter. Tell him Thomas contacted you directly, which bypasses Pratt entirely, which I believe is improper conduct. And Henderson will know what to do with it." Caleb was already moving toward the desk. "Anything else?" "Tell him we want the trust records. Whatever legal mechanism gets us those records, we want to pursue it." She sat down at the table. "Thomas made a mistake writing to you directly. He thought it would frighten you or turn you against me. What it actually did was give us evidence of bad faith. Henderson will know how to use that." "He underestimated you again," Caleb said, pulling out paper. "He underestimated us," she corrected. The distinction was not lost on him. She saw his hand pause for a fraction of a second before he began writing. It was Martha who came the following morning with information that changed everything. She arrived early, before the breakfast things were cleared, and she had the particular look she wore when she was carrying something important, her face slightly more careful than usual, her movements a touch more deliberate. She accepted the coffee. Evelyn poured and sat down and looked at them both and said, "Gerald Pratt had dinner last night with Daniel Forsythe." Evelyn looked at Caleb. Caleb looked at Martha. "Who is Daniel Forsythe?" "Territorial Land Commissioner," Martha said. "Appointed 6 months ago. He and Bill were at the county meeting last spring." She set her cup down. "He also owes Thomas Whitaker money. Bill found out through his brother back in Ohio. who does business with one of Whitaker's associates. Forsyth borrowed significantly from Whitaker's private lending operation 3 years ago. Never fully repaid. The room went very quiet. He has a man inside the territorial government, Evelyn said slowly. He has a man who owes him, Martha corrected, which is the same thing. What can Forsyth do? Caleb asked. Land commissioner has no direct jurisdiction over marriage law, Martha said. But he has relationships with the territorial governor's office. And the territorial governor appoints the judges. She paused. If Whitaker needs a particular ruling in a particular court, Forsyth is the pressure point. Evelyn pressed her fingers against the table. She could feel the geometry of it shifting. Had thought they were in a legal dispute, manageable, documentable, winnable on the merits, and now understood that Thomas had not come to them with a legal dispute. He had come with an entire machinery the way he did everything, the pieces already in place before the first piece was visibly moved. Henderson needs to know about Forsyth, she said. Already sent Bill with a note this morning, Martha said. Didn't want to wait. Evelyn looked at this woman, who had brought blueberry pie and sat down without being asked, and told her stories about Ohio winters and the first kind of difficult man, and felt something settle in her that was not quite gratitude and not quite love, but contained elements of both. Martha, she said, why are you doing this? Martha looked at her with the expression of someone to whom the question was slightly confusing. Because you're here, she said, and you're ours. She said it as matter-of-factly as Caleb had said. You're my wife. Red Willow looks after its own. Most places do if you let them. Evelyn had not let anywhere do that before. She was letting it now. Henderson's response to both the letter about Pratt and the information about Forsyth arrived. 4 days later, and it was a different letter from his previous ones. Longer, sharper, with an urgency in the structure of it that told her. Henderson was now treating this as a different category of case. He had made inquiries through his own Helena contacts about the relationship between Forsyth and Whitaker. He had found, through channels he did not specify, a record of the loan and a pattern of communication that suggested the relationship was ongoing. He had also found, and this was the thing that made her hands still on the paper as she read it, a record in the Territorial Land Office of an application filed 3 weeks ago for a provisional title claim on parcels adjacent to the Whitmore Ranch. She read that section 3 times, filed by a Boston land investment group, in which Thomas Whitaker held a 30% ownership interest. She brought the letter to Caleb at the fence line where he was working, and she handed it to him and watched him. Read it. And watched the moment he reached that section, and the quality of his stillness changed. He's trying to take the land, Caleb said. He's trying to make you need him, she said, or make you vulnerable enough that fighting him becomes impossible. If he can tie up the land title, any legal proceeding about the trust becomes secondary to the land dispute, and land disputes in territorial courts can run for years. She heard the edge in her own voice and did not soften it. He knew about the ranch before he sent Pratt. He's been planning this longer than we realized. Caleb folded the letter and held it and looked at the far edge of his property line, the land he had built, acre by acre, with 10 years of work that showed in every callus on his hands. He came after you, he said, and because he came after you, he's coming after this. I'm sorry, she said, and meant it with a depth she had not anticipated, because she was. She had brought this to him. Her past, her guardian, her father's estate, and all the machinery Thomas had built around it. All of it had followed her here and was now pressing against the life Caleb had built before she arrived. He turned and looked at her with an expression that stopped the apology from continuing. Don't, he said. Don't apologize for what he's doing. You didn't do this, he did. But Evelyn, he stepped closer. Not touching her, he never initiated that, had never pushed any boundary of closeness, had waited always for her to determine the distance between them. But close enough that she understood this was a deliberate narrowing of the space. When I said you were mine to protect, I meant the whole of what that required. Not just the easy part. She looked at him. He's coming here, Caleb said. Pratt told me in a note this morning. Thomas Whitaker himself is coming to Red Willow. He'll arrive by the end of the week. Her stomach dropped. He wants to see you, he continued, face to face. Without attorneys, without he sent the note to me, because he thinks, I'll manage you into the meeting. That's his language. That you need to be managed. She felt the old fear move through her. The specific cold of it, the way it lived in the chest and radiated outward, the way it turned her body back into something that remembered being very small in a very large house in Boston. She felt all of that, and she breathed through it, and she let it move. And when it had moved enough, she said, "Let him come." Caleb looked at her carefully. "He's been 600 miles away, and he's been this powerful," she said. "I want to see what he looks like in a room where I am not afraid of him." She met Caleb's eyes. "Because I don't think he's as powerful as I've been imagining. I think distance makes him larger. I think if I see him, actually see him, I'll understand something I've been unable to understand from far away." "What's that?" "That he's just a man," she said. "A man who wanted money and used me to get it, and who is now very inconvenienced that I left." She straightened her spine, and she felt it in every vertebra, the deliberate architecture of a posture that chose to be upright. "I want to look him in the face, and I want him to see who I've become. Not for him. For me." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. "Then that's what we'll do," he said. He handed her back Henderson's letter. She folded it and put it in her pocket, and turned and walked back toward the house. And she was aware of herself walking differently from the woman who had walked to a train station where tree teaches dark in Boston, not running, not looking over her shoulder, not calculating the distance between herself and safety, walking toward the thing she was afraid of, on ground that was hers, beside a man who had chosen, every single day since she arrived, to stand on that ground beside her. Thomas Whitaker was coming to Red Willow. And for the first time in 4 years, Evelyn was not the one who would be afraid. Thomas Whitaker arrived on a Friday. Evelyn knew the moment he stepped off the train because she felt it, not saw it. Felt it, the way you feel a change in pressure before a storm arrives. The way the body knows something before the mind has organized the information into words. She was at the general store with Martha when Danny Marsh came running in from the direction of the station with the particular energy of a boy who understood he was carrying important news, and he stopped in the doorway and looked at Evelyn and said, "Man just got off the train. Dressed real fine, asked where to find you." Martha put her hand briefly on Evelyn's arm. Not squeezing, not managing, just present. Contact that said, "I am here," without requiring her to do anything with it. "Thank you, Danny," Evelyn said. Her voice was level. She was proud of her voice. She had spent the 4 days, since Caleb told her, Thomas was coming doing something she had never done before in relation to Thomas Whitaker. She had prepared. Not the old preparation, the defensive crouching preparation of someone trying to minimize damage, but deliberate, forward preparation. She and Caleb had met with Henderson, who had made the journey from Helena specifically for this, and they had sat at the kitchen table for 2 hours, going through every element of what Thomas could do and what they could do in response. And Henderson had walked them through the trust records he had obtained, through a territorial court order records that confirmed, in the dry and precise language of accounting, exactly what Evelyn had suspected. Thomas Whitaker had transferred $11,000 from her father's estate trust into his personal accounts over 4 years. He had done it carefully, in small amounts, disguised in the records as administrative fees and maintenance costs and legal expenses. It was, Henderson said, the work of a man who believed he would never be caught, because the person who would catch him was a woman he had rendered too frightened and too isolated to look. $11,000. She had held that number, and turned it over, and looked at it from every angle, and felt something she had not expected, not rage, or not only rage. Also a deep and clarifying relief, the relief of being right about something you have suspected for a long time. The relief of the truth being visible and documentable, and no longer something only you could see. Thomas Whitaker had come to Red Willow to retrieve what he considered his. He did not yet know that Henderson had those records. He did not yet know that Forsyth's connection to him had been documented and reported to the territorial governor's office through Henderson's contacts, and that Forsyth had already, very quietly, withdrawn his involvement from anything related to the Whitmore Ranch land dispute. He did not yet know that he had walked into a town that knew exactly who he was, and had decided in the particular way that small frontier communities decide things, that he was not welcome to do what he had come to do. He knew none of this, and Evelyn intended to be the person who told him. She found him at the hotel. He had not sent a note. This time he had simply arrived, and assumed, as he had always assumed, that his presence was sufficient announcement of itself. The hotel clerk told her he was in the sitting room, and she walked in without having herself announced, which was the first small deliberate act of the afternoon. He looked older. She had not expected that. In her memory, in the 4 years since she had left, Thomas Whitaker had maintained a kind of fixed quality in her mind, unchanged, unchangeable, the same cold authority she had known at 22 when her parents died, and he had arrived to administer her affairs. He was 53 now, and the 4 years had done to him what 4 years do to men who spend them in the close management of stress and strategy and the maintenance of positions that require constant pressure to hold. He looked older, and he looked, when he saw her come through the door, without announcement, and without the particular posture he had trained her into, something she had never once seen on his face in 4 years. He looked uncertain. It was only for a moment. He recovered quickly. Thomas Whitaker had spent his adult life recovering quickly from things, and by the time she had crossed the room he was standing with his characteristic composure, every line of him arranged in the configuration she remembered as authority. "Evelyn," he said. "You look well, Mr. Whitaker," she said. She did not sit, and she did not invite him to. She stood in the middle of the room, and she looked at him, and she let herself look, really look, without the flinch, and without the management. "I won't take much of your time." Something moved across his face. "I traveled a considerable distance. I know, and I imagine the journey gave you time to think carefully about what you intended to say." She kept her voice even. "I want to offer you the same opportunity I gave Mr. Pratt, which is to hear your position before our attorneys are formally involved." As a courtesy she paused. Only a courtesy. His eyes were the same. Whatever else 4 years had done to him, his eyes were identical, that particular pale assessment, the way they moved across a person calculating, rather than seeing. She had spent 4 years trying to survive those eyes. She stood in them now and felt her heartbeat in her ears and kept her spine exactly where it was. "You've made yourself into quite the frontier wife," he said. The word frontier in his mouth was a category of dismissal. "I hope the rancher is treating you reasonably." "His name is Caleb Whitmore, and he is my husband," she said. "And he is treating me the way I should always have been treated, which is as a person with a mind and a will of her own." She let that settle for exactly 1 beat. "I know about the trust accounts, Thomas." The silence that followed was the most significant silence she had experienced since the letter arrived in early August. His face did not change. Thomas Whitaker's face very rarely changed when he was absorbing dangerous information. This was one of the things she had always found most frightening about him. The way he could receive the worst news without any visible, which made it impossible to track what he was deciding. She had learned to read the non-reaction, had become expert in its subtleties, and what she read now was not composure. What she read was the very precise containment of a man who was rapidly and silently reorganizing. "I don't know what you think you know," he said. $11,240, she said. "Over 4 years, transferred in increments small enough not to trigger review. Administrative fees, maintenance costs, and my personal favorite legal expenses for a guardianship that required almost no legal expense once it was established." She held his gaze. "Our attorney obtained the trust records through a territorial court order. They are now in Henderson's possession, and copies have been sent to 3 separate locations. Your attorney has no standing to." "He has every standing," she said, "because you challenged the marriage, which established my legal standing as a party to the trust, which opened the records to examination. You opened the door, Thomas. You opened it, and we walked through it." He was very still. She had rehearsed this moment. She and Caleb had sat by the fireplace the night before, and he had listened while she went through it out loud. and he had not interrupted or managed or softened it. He had listened to every word, and when she finished, he had said, "Say it exactly like that," and she had known he meant it. Because he never said things he did not mean. "You have two options," she said to Thomas Whitaker, the man who had spent 4 years making her feel that she had none. "The first is that you withdraw the legal challenge entirely, instruct Pratt to file the necessary dismissal in Helena, and instruct your land investment group to withdraw the provisional title claim on the parcels adjacent to this ranch. In exchange, we will not pursue the trust misappropriation through criminal channels. You will not be charged. You will simply be finished." His jaw moved. "And the second option, we go to court. The marriage challenge fails on its merits, which Henderson is confident it will. The trust records become part of the public proceeding. The misappropriation becomes a criminal matter. And the territorial governor's office, which has been made aware of Mr. Forsyth's financial relationship with you and his involvement in your strategy here, has all the information it needs to make that proceeding as thorough as possible." She paused. "You have connections in Boston, Thomas. You have built a great deal on reputation. I think you understand what a public fraud proceeding in a territorial court would do to that reputation." The silence this time was longer. She watched him in it. Watched the calculation run behind those unchanged eyes. Watched the reorganization of a man who had come expecting to find the woman he had last seen in Boston, frightened, isolated, easily managed, and had found instead someone he did not recognize and could not immediately account for. "You couldn't have done this alone," he said finally. "It was meant to diminish her." He was reaching for diminishment because it was the tool he knew. "I didn't do it alone," she said. "That's rather the point." He looked at her for a long moment. "You think you've won. I think you've lost," she corrected. "They're not the same thing. I haven't done this to win. I've done it to be free of you. Those are different motivations, and they lead to different places." She straightened already straight, but she found another degree of it, the way she had been finding extra degrees of herself since March. "I am free of you, Thomas. The question is only whether you make that truth expensive for yourself." She left him, standing in the hotel sitting room. Her legs were shaking by the time she reached the bottom of the stairs. A fine, rapid trembling she felt in her knees and thighs. That had nothing to do with weakness and everything to do with the amount of adrenaline that had been running through her body since Danny marched in the doorway of the general store. She sat down on the bottom step and put her hands on her knees and breathed. Martha was waiting outside. She had not come in, had understood, without being told, that this was something Evelyn needed to do alone. And when Evelyn came through the door, she looked at her face and said nothing, simply handed her a handkerchief that Evelyn did not need because she was not crying, and fell into step beside her. "Well," Martha said, "I said everything I came to say." "And him? He didn't fall apart," Evelyn said. "He's not the kind of man who falls apart. But I saw him recalculate. I know what that looks like on him." She pressed the handkerchief briefly against her mouth, not from emotion, but from the need to press something solid against something that was vibrating. "He'll take the first option. He doesn't have the stomach for public exposure. He never has. He's spent his entire adult life being very careful that everything he does looks exactly right, and a criminal fraud proceeding in a territorial court is the one thing that cannot be made to look exactly right." Martha nodded. She was quiet for half a block, and then she said, "How do you feel?" Evelyn thought about it honestly. "Strange," she said. "I thought I would feel more. I've been building toward that room for months, and now that I've been in it, I feel strange. Like something very large I was carrying has been set down, but my arms still know the weight of it." "That's how it goes," Martha said. "The carrying is a habit. It takes a while for your body to understand. It's allowed to stop." Caleb was at the ranch when she arrived. He had wanted to come with her, had said so plainly, had not argued when she said she needed to go alone, but had made clear the wanting, and he was at the fence line when she came back, which she understood was where he had been putting himself. So his hands had something to do while he waited. He saw her coming, and he came away from the fence line and met her partway. He read her face the way he always read her face, completely and without hurry. Done, he said. Done, she said, I think. Henderson is inside. He wanted to be here for whatever comes next. She nodded. They walked toward the house, and somewhere in the middle of the distance between the fence and the doors, she reached out and found his hand, which was not something she had done before, had not allowed herself to do before, had kept herself carefully inside her own borders, and she held it, briefly, until they reached the steps. He did not make anything of it. He simply held on for the second she needed, and let go when she let go. That was everything. Henderson received the news about the meeting with the same professional calm he brought to everything, made careful notes, and said he would wait for Pratt's formal contact. If Whitaker takes the option you've offered, he said, we'll have documents to sign and filings to make, and it will take 3 to 4 weeks to close completely. But if he's as rational about self-preservation as you believe, we should hear from Pratt within 48 hours. They heard from Pratt in 36. The note came to the ranch by messenger, and Evelyn opened it at the kitchen table, with Caleb across from her and Henderson standing by the window, and it was short, as all of Pratt's notes were short, but the register of it was entirely different from the notes that had preceded it. Mr. Henderson, my client has instructed me to advise that he wishes to pursue an amicable resolution of all outstanding matters. I will be in contact regarding the formal dismissal of the Helena filing and the withdrawal of the land claim. My client additionally asks that the matter of the trust accounts be considered settled and closed. She read it twice. She set it down. He's done, Henderson said. She sat with that for a moment. The word done applied to Thomas Whitaker, the 2 syllables of it landing in her chest, and releasing something she hadn't known was still being held. He's done, she said. It did not feel the way she had imagined it would feel. She had imagined relief, or triumph, or some version of emotional arrival. What she felt instead was quieter and deeper than any of those things. The particular sensation of a very long weight being set down, of something that had been held in tension finally going slack, of her body understanding, at a cellular level, that it was allowed now to stop bracing. Caleb was watching her. He was watching her, the way he watched things he cared about, with that full, unhurried attention that saw, without requiring the seen thing to perform its being seen. Are you all right? He asked. I'm yes. She looked at him. I don't quite know what to do without it. Without what? The waiting, she said, for the next thing to go wrong. I've been waiting for it since I was 22 years old. She pressed her fingers flat against the table. I don't know what you do with yourself when you're not waiting. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, you live. Henderson left that afternoon, shaking both their hands and telling them he would send the closing documents as they were completed. He also told Evelyn, before he left, that the trust, what remained of it after Thomas's depredations, was legally hers now, to be administered by an independent trustee of her choosing, until she was 30, at which point it came to her outright. He named a figure. She had not known her father had built that much. She had not known because Thomas had never told her. And she understood now that the not telling had been deliberate, that the entire architecture of her 4 years under his care had been built on her not knowing the declensions of her own life. She sat with that figure for a long time. Then she thought about what she wanted to do with it, and the thinking was different from any thinking she had before not managed around what was permitted or possible, or likely to draw approval, but honest. The way all her thinking had been becoming more honest, degree by degree, since she arrived in Red Willow. Caleb came in as the afternoon was going and found her sitting at the desk with paper and a pen, and the particular look she wore when she was working something out. Writing to someone, he said. Making a list, she said. He looked over her shoulder. She did not cover the paper, which was its own kind of statement about where they had arrived. He read the list she knew when he reached the important part, because his breathing changed slightly. You want to open a school, he said. The children on the ranches around here have almost nothing, she said. I know because you've told me, and because I've been listening. The nearest schoolhouse is 15 miles, and most families can't send their children that far in winter. She looked at the list. I was a teacher before everything changed. I was good at it. I have a trust that's mine, and I have. She stopped. "What?" he said. "I have a life here," she said, "an actual life. And I want to use it for something real." He was quiet for a moment. She turned to look at him. "I want to talk to you about something else," he said. His voice had changed, not the working voice, not the practical voice, but the other one, the one he used for the things he meant most, the one that came out quieter and more careful. He sat down across from her, and he set his hat on the table, and he did the thing with his hands, the clasping, his version of the thing she used to do. And she understood she was about to receive something he had been preparing for a while. "This started as an arrangement," he said. "Yes," she said carefully. "It's not that anymore." He looked at her directly, with the full, unguarded honesty that she had come to understand was the rarest and most valuable thing about him. "I don't think it's been that for a while. I think we've both known that, and neither of us has said it, because we've both been careful about the knowing." She could not speak. She sat very still. "I'm not going to perform this," he said. "You know me well enough to know I can't perform things and have them mean anything. So I'll just say it plainly," he breathed. "I love you. Not because you needed protection, and I'm the kind of man who provides it. Not because you arrived here and had nowhere else to go. Because of who you are, specifically. The way you think, and the way you fight, and the way you stood in that hotel room and told Thomas Whitaker exactly what he was without raising your voice." He paused. "The way you asked me about Clara. The way you listened." She was holding the edge of the desk with one hand. She was aware of doing it because she needed something solid. "I know you've had to rebuild your understanding of what trust means," he said. "I know you're still in that rebuilding. I'm not asking you to finish it on a schedule that works for me. I'm asking you to know that I'm here, for however that rebuilding goes. And I would very much like to be your husband, in the actual sense of the word, when and if that's something you want." The room was very quiet. She thought about the train. She thought about the coins in the sewing box. She thought about the first morning, and the bucket handle, and the ledger, and the fence line and the mare. She thought about Clara told to her in lamplight. She thought about a letter torn into pieces and dropped into a firebox. She thought about a hand that held and let go at exactly the right moment. She thought about what it felt like to want something simply. "Caleb," she said. Her voice was unsteady, and she did not try to steady it because she had decided, somewhere in the geography of this afternoon, that there were things that deserved to be said unsteadily. "I came here to survive. I didn't come here to love anyone. I didn't believe I was capable of it anymore." She looked at him. "I was wrong about that. I know that I was wrong. Because what I feel when I look at you is so far outside surviving that I don't have a smaller word for it." He was watching her with that complete attention. "Yes," she said. "I want to be your wife, the actual kind." She felt something open in her chest, not break, not crack, but open, the way a window opens into air that is cleaner than the room. "I am choosing it, clearly and completely, not because I have to, and not because I'm afraid of what comes without it. Because," he said, and his voice was quiet and not performing either. "Because you are the best person I know," she said. "And because you taught me that I'm allowed to want things that are good for me. And because I am completely sure, which is something I have not been about anything in a very long time." He reached across the table and covered her hand, with his not brief this time, not practical, not released at the earliest opportunity. He held on, she held back. They sat like that for a moment in the house that had started as an arrangement, and had become the realest thing in her life, and outside the Montana evening was doing whatever it did at this hour, and somewhere the mare was in the paddock, and the kitchen garden was growing, and the cattle records that were half hers sat on the shelf, and the list on the desk had a school written on it in her own handwriting, and Evelyn Whitmore, who had been Evelyn Harper, who had been the frightened woman in the last car of the train looking back at Boston, dissolving, held the hand of the man across the table, and understood that this was what survival looked like when it finished. It looked like choosing, it looked like staying, it looked improbably and entirely like this. The wedding was on a Saturday in October, which in Montana meant cold air and a sky so clear it looked like someone had decided to take the morning seriously. Bill and Martha Hendricks were there. James Henderson made the trip from Helena. The Anderson family from the general store came, and the Marsh family, and several of the surrounding ranching families, who had watched the whole of the past months with that careful frontier attention, and had decided, collectively and without discussion, that the Whitmores were people worth celebrating. The minister asked Evelyn if she took this man of her own free will. She said yes before he had finished the sentence. Caleb heard it, and she saw something move across his face, something warm and unguarded, there for a full moment before it settled into the quiet certainty that was his natural expression. It was, she thought, the most she had ever seen him show. Martha cried. Bill Hendricks handed her his handkerchief and pretended he had not needed it himself. Evelyn held Caleb's hands in front of everyone who had become her community in the town that had become her home, and she said the words that made the arrangement real, and she meant every syllable of all of them. Afterward, Caleb said to her quietly, "You're not frightened." "No," she said, slightly surprised to find it true. "I'm not." "Good," he said. They walked out together into the October morning, into the cold, clean air, and the clear light, and the town of Red Willow that had decided they were its own. And she felt the ground under her feet the way she had learned to feel it over the past months, solid, real, hers. Not because someone gave it to her, because she had stood on it long enough to earn the knowing. The first winter after the wedding was the hardest winter Red Willow had seen in a decade, and Evelyn did not mind it at all. This surprised her. She had spent her life in Boston, where winter was a managed inconvenience, something that happened to the city, and was addressed through adequate coal and closed windows, and the particular social insulation of a household with means. Montana winter was nothing like that. Montana winter was a living thing with an opinion, something that pressed against every wall and tested every joint and required daily decision-making about what could be done and what had to wait. She had expected to be defeated by it. She was not. She was, in some way she could not entirely explain, energized by it, by the clarity of a problem that was physical and immediate, and could be solved with work rather than strategy. Caleb watched her figure this out, with the same quiet attention he brought to everything, and one morning in January, when she came in from helping with the horses, a task she had taken on herself, without being asked, sometime in November, when it became clear that winter demanded every set of available hands, he looked at her, stamping snow from her boots, and said, "You're happy." She stopped stamping, thought about it. "Yes," she said, slightly surprised, as she was still slightly surprised sometimes, when the happiness arrived without the instinct to check over her shoulder for whatever would take it away. "I am." "Good," he said. He handed her a cup of coffee and went back to the ledger they had been working on together the previous evening, and she stood there for a moment in the particular warmth of a house that was hers genuinely, completely, not provisionally, and let herself have it. That was the new practice, letting herself have things. She had been working on it since October, and she was getting better at it, though it still required something like conscious effort, the deliberate internal instruction to receive rather than deflect. She suspected it would be work for a long time. She did not mind. She had learned that the work itself could be evidence of recovery, rather than evidence of what was still broken. She had started the school in November, which everyone including Caleb had told her was the wrong time of year, and which she had done anyway, because waiting for the right conditions was something she had spent 4 years doing. And she was finished with it. She had overnight, not all at once, the surrounding ranching families, 12 of them within reasonable distance, and had explained what she intended and what she needed, which was children who wanted to learn, and parents willing to bring them 3 mornings a week to the room she had arranged in the back of the community building, with the Andersons' permission and 2 long tables, and the school supplies she had ordered through the catalog with the first of the trust money that had arrived in her account in October. 8 families responded. 21 children, ranging from 6 to 14, showed up on the first morning in a state of collective uncertainty that she recognized, because she had worn it herself, the uncertainty of a person arriving somewhere new, not knowing whether would want them. She knew exactly what to do with that. She stood in front of those 21 children on the first morning, and she said, "I'm Mrs. Whitmore. I came here from Boston, which is very far away, and I was frightened when I arrived. I want you to know that being frightened when you arrive somewhere new is entirely reasonable, and also that it gets better. Now, who can tell me something they're good at?" Martha told her later that by noon, word had reached the hotel, the general store, and at least 3 homesteads that the Whitmore woman was something special with children. Evelyn received this information and filed it in the same place she was learning to file all the evidence of who she was becoming, not as something that required her to perform the receiving of it, but as data, accumulating into a picture she was still learning to trust. The children were the thing she had not expected. She had expected to teach. She had not expected to be remade by the teaching. But there was something in the particular honesty of children, the way they responded to exactly what you gave them. No more and no less, with no agenda behind the response that did something to her understanding of herself. They came to her frightened and uncertain. And she showed them that the frightened and uncertain could learn, and in showing them that she learned it again for herself, again and again, every Monday and Wednesday and Friday morning. One child in particular lodged herself somewhere permanent. Her name was Anna Reyes, and she was 9 years old, and quite, not all at once. And she had arrived in that first week of school with her older brother because their parents worked the neighboring ranch and could not always bring them, and Anna had sat in the back with her hands folded, and her eyes watching everything without committing to anything. And Evelyn had recognized her immediately because she had been her. She did not make a project of Anna. She did not approach her with special attention or deliberate warmth, or the performing care that children could smell from across a room. She simply taught the class and included Anna in it the same way she included everyone, and she waited. 3 weeks in, Anna stayed after the others left. She stood by the door and she said, looking at the floor, "My brother says I'm too smart for my own good." Evelyn looked at her. "What do you think?" Anna looked up. "I think I'm just smart." The "for my own good" part is something other people added. Evelyn felt something move through her so swiftly and so deeply she had to breathe through it. "Your brother is wrong," she said simply, "and you already know that. So the question is what you're going to do with being right." Anna considered this. "Learn things," she said. "Yes," Evelyn said. "That's exactly what you're going to do." Anna came early from that week forward and stayed late and asked questions with a directness that reminded Evelyn of someone she could not immediately place, and then one evening realized was herself, the self before Boston and before Thomas, the girl who had argued and questioned and refused to be smaller than she actually was, until someone spent 4 careful years teaching her to be. She told Caleb about Anna that night. He listened the way he listened to everything she told him entirely, without the partial attention of a man whose mind was elsewhere. This was one of the things she had added to the long list she kept internally of what Caleb Whitmore was. The things she had been accumulating since the train platform in March. He listened, as if what she was saying was the most important thing currently happening, because when she was talking for him, it was. "She sounds like you," he said when she finished. "She is me," Evelyn said. "The me I was before. I keep trying to. I want to make sure no one does to her what what Thomas did to you, what the world does to girls who are too smart for other people's comfort," she said, "which is tell them that the excess of themselves is the problem, rather than the problem being a world too small for them." She looked at her hands. "I keep thinking about what I would have been if someone had told me at 9 years old that the right response to being right was to stay right, not to make myself smaller to fit." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "So tell her I am telling her. Keep telling her." A pause. "And tell yourself while you're at it." She looked at him. He was watching her with that clear, steady attention, and she thought not for the first time, but with a freshness that had not worn off, that she had not known it was possible to be known this way, to be seen this precisely, without the seeing being used for anything other than the pure act of witnessing. "I love you," she said. She had been saying it since October, and it still arrived in her mouth with a slight sense of wonder. "The way you feel wonder at a thing that is real and good and yours. I want you to know I mean it every time. It's not habit yet. It's still a choice." He looked at her for a moment. "For me too," he said quietly. "Still a choice every morning." That was the best thing anyone had ever said to her. Spring came the way. Spring comes in Montana sudden and slightly unbelievable. After the winter, everything at once. The thaw and the growth and the particular quality of light that made the world look like it had been rinsed clean. The ranch responded to it, the way the ranch responded to everything. Caleb did carefully, with productivity. Not all the herd had wintered better than the previous year, which Evelyn had predicted in November based on the changes they had made to the wintering approach, changes that had come out of her reading of the records, and her conversation with Caleb about the patterns she had found in the data. Caleb had implemented them without needing to discuss whose idea they were, and the outcome was its own discussion. "You were right about the wintering," he said in April, going over the spring numbers. "I know," she said, without apology or deflection. He looked at her, and the corner of his mouth moved in the particular way it moved when he was not going to smile, but wanted to. "Getting bolder," he said. "Getting accurate," she corrected. "There's a difference." It was Henderson who brought the news in May, arriving from Helena with paperwork and the particular air of a man delivering something that had been a long time coming, and was pleased about it. Thomas Whitaker had settled fully. Every filing had been withdrawn. The land investment group had been dissolved, its territorial claims abandoned, and the trust, what remained of it, after Thomas's careful depredations, which was still a considerable sum, had been formally transferred to Evelyn's independent account. But the thing Henderson told her that she had not expected, the thing that made her sit down in the kitchen chair and press her hand flat against the table, was the last item in his report. Thomas Whitaker had been quietly let go from 3 of his 4 board positions in Boston. The information about the trust misappropriation, which she had believed was contained, had believed. Thomas's acceptance of the first option meant it contained, not, it appeared, stayed entirely contained. Henderson was circumspect about the mechanism. He said only that certain parties with interest in Thomas's professional conduct had received certain information through certain channels, and that the consequences were entirely within those parties' authority. "He didn't just lose here," she said slowly. "No," Henderson said. "He did not." "Who?" She looked at Henderson. "Did you?" "I am an officer of the court," Henderson said pleasantly, with many professional relationships throughout the region, and occasionally beyond it. He straightened his papers. "That is all I'm prepared to say." She looked at Caleb, who was leaning against the doorframe, with the expression of a man who knows slightly more than he is currently required to disclose. "Caleb," she said. "Henderson is a thorough man," Caleb said. "I've always appreciated that about him. You told him to. I may have had a conversation about what thoroughness in this case might look like." She stared at him. She felt something rise in her that was complicated. Complicated because she had spent the past year learning to fight her own battles, and here was evidence that he had been fighting one alongside her without telling her, and she was not certain whether she was angry about the not telling or moved by the alongside. She sat with it for a moment, honestly, the way she had been practicing, sitting with complicated things. "You should have told me," she said. "Yes," he said. He did not argue it or explain it away. "I should have." "Why didn't you?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because I wasn't sure it would work. And I didn't want to offer you something that might not come through." He met her eyes. "That was wrong. You deserve to know." She looked at him. He had not tried to justify it, or to manage her response to it. He had simply agreed that he was wrong, and told her why. Which was still something she was not entirely accustomed to, from a person with authority over her life, the clean accountability, the lack of defense. "Don't do it again," she said. "I won't," he said. She believed him. That was the thing she returned to in quiet moments, when she was thinking about what had been built in the past year, in this house, and in this life, the fact that she believed him. Not naively, not with the willful blindness of someone who needed to believe, and had constructed the belief from insufficient evidence, with the considered, evidence-based belief of a woman who had watched this man make and keep promises under conditions that tested whether promises were real, and had found, consistently, that they were. The school grew in the second year. She added 2 afternoons a week and a 4th morning, and she brought in a second teacher, a young woman named Ruth Calloway, who had come west with her family and had a year of normal school training and needed the work, and was, it turned out, extraordinary with the youngest children, in the way that some people simply were, as if they had been built for exactly that specific purpose. Anna Reyes was reading at a level 4 years above her age by the time she was 11. Evelyn arranged, through Henderson, for Anna to correspond with a professor of mathematics at a college in Denver who had a program for the identification of exceptional young students in the territories. The professor wrote back within 2 weeks, with a letter of such enthusiasm that it was slightly alarming, and Anna read it in the classroom, with the particular expression of someone receiving confirmation of something they had always suspected about themselves. "He thinks I'm remarkable," Anna said, not with vanity, with the careful recognition of something that deserved to be named. "You are remarkable," Evelyn said. "What are you going to do with it?" Anna looked at the letter. "Everything," she said. "Good," Evelyn said. "That's the correct answer." She wrote to Clara in Oregon that year. She had been thinking about it for months and had not done it. Out of a shyness she did not immediately understand, and then understood as a fear of getting it wrong, of reaching toward the person who was the other side of Caleb's grief, and having the reaching be clumsy, or presumptuous, or anything less than what it should be. She wrote the letter over 3 evenings, throwing out the first 2 versions, and sent the third one, which was still not perfect but was honest, which she had decided was more important than perfect. She told Clara that she was married to her brother. She told her what he was like. Not what he was like to the town, or in his professional capacity, but what he was like at the kitchen table at 7 in the morning, and what he was like when he was thinking through a difficult problem, and what he had been like on a train platform in March, when a frightened woman arrived with a single suitcase, and he had offered a hand and released it the instant she was steady. She told Clara that she understood, without anything being said directly, what Caleb carried about the timing and the 24 hours, and that she wanted Clara to know that whatever damage had been done to him by that guilt had not become damage done to her, that he had taken the thing that broke him and turned it into something that protected rather than controlled. She did not know if this would help. She sent it anyway. Clara's response arrived 3 weeks later, and it was long 7 pages in handwriting that had a slight tremor in it, that Evelyn recognized as someone writing through emotion they were not quite containing. And it was the beginning of a correspondence that would continue for years. What? Letters crossing the distance between Montana and Oregon, carrying the particular cargo of 2 women who had survived different versions of the same thing, and found, in the finding of each other, a language they had both been missing. Caleb read Clara's first letter without asking for it. Evelyn handed it to him across the table without explanation, because there were parts of it she needed him to receive. She watched him read it. She watched the moment he reached the middle section, where Clara wrote about the 24 hours, and what she needed him to understand about it, that she did not blame him, that she had never blamed him, that the only person responsible for what happened was the man who had done it. And she watched the thing that she saw across his face, which was not the controlled neutral expression he wore for difficult information, but something rawer and more interior, and very obviously not performed. He finished the letter. He set it down. He did not say anything for a long time. "She's all right," Evelyn said quietly. "She sounds like herself," he said. His voice was different than usual. "She sounds exactly like herself." "Yes." He pressed the back of his hand briefly against his mouth, the way people do when they're keeping something in that wants to come out, and she did not say anything and did not look away, because she had learned that being witnessed mattered even when, especially when the person being witnessed could not yet speak. After a moment he said, "How did you know to write to her?" "Because you gave me Clara, and it changed how I understood you," she said. "And I thought she should have someone do that for her." Give her back the brother as he actually is. She looked at him. She needed to know who you became, not just who you couldn't be in time. He looked at her for a long moment, with that open, unguarded expression she had come to understand, as the closest Caleb Whitmore came to completely undone. "Evelyn," he said. "Yes? I didn't know. When I put that advertisement in the paper," he said, slowly, "what I was asking for. I thought I was asking for a practical arrangement. A capable woman. Someone willing to do the work." He paused. "I didn't know I was going to find this." "Neither did I," she said. Do you?" He stopped. It was unusual for Caleb to not find his words immediately, and she recognized the unusualness of it as evidence of how much this cost him to say. "Are you glad you came?" She looked at him, this man who had turned a hat in his hands on a train platform, and told her she did not have to tell him everything today, and had meant it, who had taught her by example that a mistake in the ledger cost nothing, who had burned a letter from Thomas Whitaker in a firebox, and told her he was her husband in every sense that mattered, who had listened to her talk about Anna, and said, "Keep telling her, and tell yourself while you're at it." She looked at this man, and thought about the question he was asking, which was not really the question it appeared to be on the surface. Under it was the real question. Did any of it matter? Does it hold? Is what we have built real in the way real things are real? "I am glad," she said. "Not in a small way. In the largest way I know how to be glad." She held his gaze. "You gave me back my life, Caleb, not by saving me. By standing still while I saved it myself. I don't have a word for what that is." "Neither do I," he said. "But it feels like the right kind of quiet." The years settled into each other with the particular ease of lives being genuinely lived rather than survived. The ranch grew not dramatically, not through sudden fortune, but through the steady accumulated work of two people who understood the land and each other, and brought both kinds of knowledge to every decision. They hired 2 additional hands by the 3rd year, both of them young men who had arrived in Red Willow with the same hollow look that Evelyn recognized, and she watched Caleb with those young men, and saw him do for them versions of what he had done for her. The quiet instruction, the patience that communicated that mistakes were information rather than failures, the particular dignity of being treated as a person who was capable of more than they currently believed. She told him once that he was a good teacher, and he said he had had good students, and she understood he meant both the young men at the ranch and her, and she received it without deflecting, which was itself evidence of how far she had come. The school became, in the 5th year of its existence, the first formally recognized schoolhouse in that district of Montana, with a board of directors that included Martha Hendricks and 3 of the ranching fathers, and Evelyn as its founding director. They built a proper building, small, practical. The roof sloped correctly for the snow load, windows on both sides for cross-light, using timber from a mill in Helena, and labor from 7 of the surrounding families, who showed up on a September Saturday and worked for 2 days and considered it participation in something that was going to matter. Anna Reyes left for Denver at 15, on a scholarship arranged through the professor, who had first written back with enthusiasm that was slightly alarming. She came back to Red Willow the summer she turned 19, newly credentialed, with a teaching certificate and a quiet certainty about herself that Evelyn recognized, because she had worked for years to build her own version of it. Anna sat at the kitchen table in the Whitmore house and drank coffee and said, "I want to come back. I want to teach here." Evelyn looked at her, 9 years old, and hands folded, and eyes watching everything without committing to anything. "I know," she said. "I've been keeping a place for you." Anna looked at her steadily. "You knew I'd come back?" "I knew you'd come back if you decided to," Evelyn said. "The coming back was yours to decide. The place was mine to keep." She paused. "That's how it works. You hold the door. They walk through it themselves." Anna nodded slowly, as if filing this in a particular place. "Is that what someone did for you?" Evelyn thought about a train platform in March. A hand extended and released. A man who stood still while she found her own strength. "Yes," she said. "Exactly that." Caleb came in from the cattle as Anna was leaving, and they passed in the doorway with a nod and a word, and he came in and looked at Evelyn's face and said, "She's coming back." "Yes." "Good." He sat down across from her, and they were quiet together. In the particular way they were quiet comfortably, productively. The quiet of two people who had run out of performance and found that the absence of it was the best version of being together. She was working on the school accounts. He was thinking about whatever he was thinking about, which he would tell her when he had organized it into words he trusted. After a few minutes he said, "Do you remember what you said on the train platform?" "The first thing you said to me." She thought. "Yes, I said, I'm Evelyn Harper." "And do you remember what I said?" "You said thank you for making the journey." She looked at him, and that it was a long way from Boston. "I was trying to think of something useful to say," he said. "I was nervous." She stared at him. In 4 years, she had never heard him admit to nervousness about their beginning. "You were nervous?" "You'd traveled 600 miles on the basis of an advertisement I wrote," he said. "I was standing on a train platform, waiting for a woman I'd never met who had trusted something I put in a newspaper." He met her eyes. "I was terrified. I had nothing to offer that was worth what she had risked." She sat with this for a moment. This was the thing about Caleb Whitmore that still had the power to land on her, unexpectedly after 4 years. The way he had been as uncertain as she was, as human as she was, as much in need of what they had built as she had been. Just quieter about it, in the ways he was quiet about everything that mattered most. "You had everything," she said. "You just didn't know yet what I was going to do with it." He looked at her across the kitchen table that was part hers and part his, and entirely theirs, in the house that had become the kind of home that people meant when they meant the most important thing the word could hold. And he said, "No, I didn't." And now she said. He looked at her the way he had looked at her on the train platform, which was also the way he had looked at her when he handed her a broken bucket, and across a hotel room, and through a supper of shared grief, and at an October wedding, and across every morning and evening of 4 years of becoming each other's most important fact. "Now I know exactly what I have," he said. "And I know what it cost you to give it." She reached across the table and put her hand over his, the way she had that day, walking from the fence to the house, but not briefly this time. Not a passing of contact. She held on with the full intention of holding on, and he turned his hand under hers, and held back with equal intention, and they sat like that. In the house they had built together from a practical arrangement, and a train platform, and trust given in increments, until it was given completely. Outside, the Montana evening was making its way across the ranch, the way it always did, unhurried, enormous, indifferent to human scale in the way that made human things feel both very small and very precious. Somewhere the mare was in the paddock. The school building was a mile away, its windows dark, waiting for Monday. The cattle records sat on the shelf in both their handwriting. The letter from Clara, newest in the correspondence, was on the desk, waiting to be answered. The sewing box in the bedroom held 3 folded pages, and a tin of peppermint candy, photographed to people who had not lived to see what their daughter had become. Evelyn Whitmore had arrived in Red Willow with a wounded past and a single suitcase, and the terrifying hope that something unknown could be better than something known and unbearable. She had been right. She had been right about all of it, about the advertisement and the train, and the hand on the platform, and the man who told her she did not have to explain herself today, and had given her every day since to become the person she had always been underneath the fear. She had traveled 600 miles looking for a place to survive. What she found was a life worth living, a love worth choosing, and the absolute, irreversible proof that a person's beginning, however broken, however frightened, however far it had fallen from what it should have been, does not, has never, and will never determine their ending. She had found that proof. She had become it, and she held it now, steady and unafraid, with both hands.